The first step in Harmony the Highlander is to trace the image onto your canvas using carbon paper and this tracer. A link to get the tracer and the carbon paper will be below in the description. And the first thing we're going to do after that is paint the background with a taupe color mixed with a little bit of white. It is okay if you go over your charcoal sketch at this point because we will be painting over it eventually anyways, but don't paint over the entire cow. Just paint the background, give it a little bit of interest. It doesn't have to be completely solid or uniform, and just make sure that you are painting lightly over that graphite sketch. And then we're going to go in and start with the Highlander hair. Using a dark brown, you're going to create hair and fur all across the body. The brush I'm using is a medium flat brush, and I'm holding it vertically so that it makes those lines up and down and aren't too wide. Also, since I painted the right side recently, there is paint that is mixing with those brush strokes, but that's okay. We're gonna go in and tidy them up as we go. And it's nice to have a little bit of difference. These are hair follicles in the end, so it's good if they have a little bit of variety like I'm doing here. So I did not clean my brush. I left all the brown on it, and then I just added the yellow ochre and white, and I'm creating the hair that's on top. Painting hair this way saves you hours of time because it's giving these strands dimension and depth. Now, using more of a burnt sienna color of paint, I'm creating the scarf, and I'm not worrying about filling it in too solidly because I'm going to make 2 coats over this. So while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm going to move on to the pumpkin, and using that same flat brush, only now I'm using it horizontally. I'm using a yellow ochre and a bright orange to make this pumpkin color. And again, when I'm mixing the paint on my palette, I'm just putting the paintbrush into some orange, into some yellow ochre, and then it's mixing and making all of those strokes on the canvas. So it's a very loose, freeing way to do this, but look at all the dimension that's there. Again, not cleaning my brush, just adding more of that burnt sienna and going in and painting the first layer of all of these leaves. I will go over them again with more paint once they're dry. And these leaves are just a little bit organic, not too fully shaped, because again, I'm going to go in and strengthen their shape a little bit later. This is just to get the first layer down and to get some color into these leaves. Again, I have not cleaned my brush. I just dipped it into the burnt sienna and a little bit of that taupe, and I'm making all of these leaves. I switched to a smaller brush for this leaf just because I want to get more detail and have those little flecks of those maple leaves coming out a little bit better. And this is just solid yellow ochre paint. And you can see the difference in the depth of this leaf because it doesn't have a bunch of color on it. So when you're using just a solid color, then it doesn't have that dimension. So I just went in with the current paintbrush on this color and I just added some orange, and that's why it's giving me a little bit more dimension because it's mixing on the canvas and just creating its own color. Again, I had to wash my brush to get this yellow on here, so it's pure yellow ochre, and you can tell. So we're just adding the very first layer to all of our foliage here on this piece. And then because I want that all to dry, I'm moving up to the nose of the cow using the taupe color and just filling it all in. I am going over that sketch, and that is totally okay because we're going to go over that with paint anyways, but it makes the painting look more cohesive because it's not like you're painting around or coloring within the lines. And the more paint that you can layer with acrylics, the deeper and nicer the painting will look. So now I'm doing the horns with just that taupe and some white. I'm filling them in initially, and then on the top I'm adding white to do a highlight, and then on the bottom you'll see that I'm going to do a shadow. Again, I'm doing this as a wet on wet technique. Here's the shadow. It's wet, and then I love using fingers as my blending tool. So again, just going right over top of that wet paint and smudging it to mix it all in and create those shadows. Bouncing over to the stem of the pumpkin, fill it in with black. We will come back to this a couple times and make some layers. Here's that nose. You can see that that graphite sketch is still underneath, using some red and white and a little bit of taupe to make that nice cute pink. And while all that stuff is drying, we're going to move up to the eyes, filling them in with black. I like the little tabs on the edges. This just makes the face look a little bit more junior or young, and then filling in, just following the sketch with those nostrils and a little bit of a frown, which will turn into a smile a little bit later. Painting sunflowers is so easy using this medium flat brush because it makes the perfect petal shape when you use it in the correct way. For sunflowers, you want to paint the darkest color first, and then you're going to go over a little bit later, filling in more of that foliage because I have this yellow ochre on my paintbrush. So I'm just going and filling in all of the yellow leaves that are all around. I switched to the smaller brush on this one because it's a little bit more detailed, and then filling in the center first layer of that sunflower, and then going in with some shadows and highlights using white and a dark paint to create a little bit more depth in the fur up on the face. And using white, while I have white on my brush, I'm going in to paint the tassels of the scarf. This is all about, saving yourself time by not switching brushes and cleaning brushes all the time. If you have a brush with a certain color of paint on it that's required elsewhere on your canvas, use it up instead of wasting it in your water. Your paints and your brushes will last longer this way. Since I've got white out, I'm going in with the highlight on our sunflower. Using the same brush, not cleaning it, just putting it into that orange color and making the shadows right around the center. Starting to create the really defining lines of the face now by adding a little bit of white. I'm using a angled brush. This is a 15-degree angled paintbrush, and it's going to help create a little bit thinner and more spread out thin lines that look like hair. Now adding just a little bit of interest to the scarf. You can pick whatever you want to do. In my original, this is a plaid scarf, but I didn't want to go ahead and do a plaid, so I just did some stripes. Bouncing back to our pumpkin to create some highlights. Flipping my smallest paintbrush around and putting it in white to make those perfectly circular highlights in the eyes. You need to have a barbecue skewer in your studio to do this technique. If you don't have one, go to your kitchen and get one. This is the best way to create these fine lines that look very organic. It's very tough to paint these lines and make them look very faded and sort of organic this way with a paintbrush. In the description below, I will have my mixed media must-have tools, and those are on there. So if you want to have a look at that, then take a look. It takes a while because the paint doesn't spread, but it makes it so beautiful. This line is just incredible. It makes it look less like a coloring book and more organic because the paint stops and starts and doesn't make the most necessarily clean or straight lines, but I love that about it. It makes it look really unique, and it would take a long time to paint this type of line with a paintbrush. You would never get this kind of bumpy, irregular line with a paintbrush. That being said, it is time consuming, and so with the smaller leaves, I went ahead and used my Sharpie. Only ever use these kind of markers on very dry paint. Or if you have paint markers like Posca pens, you can do this part too, but they don't make them this fine. This is a new pen from Sharpie. It's very similar to a Micron. Now that those tassels are dry, I'm going in with a very small paintbrush and adding some black. And then using that same small paintbrush and the same shading technique, I'm using a little bit of brown, and then I'm using my finger to blend it in the creases to create more dimension and a nice blurred shadow on our pumpkin. You can see I also did it amongst the leaves to create a little bit of a shadow. Doing the same technique on our scarf, pick one side of the line and create a shadow. So for me, I'm going under the right side of each stripe to create a little bit of dimension. This is my favorite hack to make a painting look like you spent hours and hours painting it. It is a total time saver, and it makes the project just look so much more advanced in terms of skill. And once I'm done this part, I want you to have a look at the painting and just see how much of a difference this little technique makes to a painting. It looks more three-dimensional. And I felt there was too much white space, so I just added some splashes using a big brush, lots of water, and some brown paint. Let me know if you think this looks like Harmony from Harry Potter as well in the comments. That's why I named her Harmony, because I see a little bit of Harmony in this one.